This will sound very strange, but the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, the explosion of reactor number 4, and the synagogue shooting in 2018, in which 4 police officers were wounded, and the synagogue shooting in 2019 in Poway, California, in which 4 people were shot, and the hostage taking in the synagogue in Texas in 2022, in which there were 4 hostages, are stunning prophecies that are pointing to the date that Israel will destroy, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities. Israel will drop a nuclear bomb on Iran on June 27, 2022. It will be the first nuclear bomb used in an act of war since World War II. The post date for this video, the date that this video is posted, proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, and videos can't be edited once they are posted. As well, this timestamped email and this forensic notes PDF prove that this prediction was made ahead of time. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. It is predicted that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities on June 27, 2022. After this short introduction, the rest of this video will be an explanation for how God's signs, patterns, and connections pointed to the date April 26th in relation to the day that Israel will bomb, probably with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities. It was known since 2021 that God was pointing to April 26th. And prior to April 26th, it was believed that this would be the date that Israel would bomb Iran. Instead, however, on this day, a big news story regarded the White House's statement that Iran's breakout time has been reduced from a year to weeks. The White House stated that it was very concerned about this. The breakout time refers to the amount of time it would take Iran to enrich enough uranium for a nuclear bomb. This was a new development regarding Iran's nuclear program, and it coincidentally occurred on April 26th, the date that was known ahead of time since 2021. This statement from the White House came after Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's testimony in a U.S. Senate hearing earlier in this day. He told Senate Foreign Relations Chairman Senator Bob Menendez that Iran's breakout time had been reduced from a year to weeks. This emphasis on weeks was a sign that God gave us that indicated that the day that Israel will nuke Iran is weeks away. But just how many weeks is the question. It is explained in the Chariots of Fire prophecy video how the prophetic signs on April 26th revealed adding 3 weeks to April 26th. This gave us May 17th. Sure enough, on May 17th, we received stunning prophetic signs related to Israel bombing Iran, and these signs were expected in advance prior to May 17th. On May 17th, it was first reported that for the first time ever, Israel would be conducting a simulation of a wide-scale attack on Iran and its nuclear facilities. This simulation drill over the Mediterranean Sea was part of the largest in decades large-scale military drill war exercise that the Israeli Defense Forces named Chariots of Fire. This month-long Chariots of Fire drill began weeks before the composer of Chariots of Fire died, and the drill was named Chariots of Fire a long time before it began. On this same May 17th day, recording artist Vangelis died. Vangelis won an Oscar Academy Award for composing the song Chariots of Fire. There are so many amazing things regarding these signs that occurred on May 17th. The prophetic chariots of fire signs revealed adding exactly 6 weeks to May 17th to give us June 27th as the day that Israel will bomb Iran. It is highly recommended that you pause this video here and first watch the Chariots of Fire prophecy video, and then come back and watch this video. Make sure you come back and watch this video though, as this video is also very important. The rest of this video was recorded before April 26th. I'm not going to edit the rest of this video. Instead, this video will provide the explanation for how God was pointing to April 26th, and what I have just said in this explanation in the introduction of this video explains how April 26th was for the purpose of pointing to May 17th and June 27th. In other words, on April 26th, God was not finished with this particular trail of signs in his big picture of signs and this story that he is telling. April 26th was a very important step and important piece of the puzzle, and to understand this story, it is essential for us to learn how God was pointing to April 26th. This will be the subject of the rest of this video. Okay, this is a truly profound video. The information you are looking at in this diagram is truly profound. I will now start explaining how all of this is leading to the day that Israel will destroy Iran's nuclear weapons program when it drops nuclear bombs on Iran, or one nuclear bomb. The first time a nuclear bomb will be used in an act of war since World War II. But let's begin with the earliest date here, which is April 11th, 2012. This was the day of what scientists called the birth pains of a new tectonic plate. When asked for the signs of his return by his disciples, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. In other words, this was an end times sign. It was the first time in recorded history in which there were 2 8-point-something magnitude earthquakes on the same day. And so there were 2 separate earthquakes, each of them greater than 8 magnitude, that occurred off the shore of Indonesia in the Indian Ocean. And God uses the country Indonesia, which is made up of 34 provinces, in which the 44th president grew up for 4 years, to point to Isaiah chapter 34, which is the chapter in the Bible regarding judgment on the nations, which will come through the Antichrist who entered politics at the age of 34, and on as explained in other videos. The number 9 from the Bible is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, as the number 9 from the Bible symbolizes judgment. 9 years connections are extremely prophetic. They are how God connects many of the signs from around this time frame to more recent signs, including this one, which was the explosion and blackout at the Natanz nuclear facility, which is where the Iranians are developing their nuclear weapons program. It's where they are enriching uranium, and it's the center of their program, and it's in rural Iran in the wilderness. No doubt Natanz will be attacked on April 26th, coming up soon. Now, these 2 dates were April 11th. God has demonstrated through other signs that the date April 11th was the day that Jesus Christ was crucified. For one thing, the 2 comets of 1997 and 96, the Hyakutake and Hale-Bopp, they crossed over, their paths of these comets crossed over each other over the star Algol, which in ancient Hebrew astrology and ancient astrology was the star that symbolized Satan and evil. And so their paths crossed each other perpendicular perpendicular to each other, and they formed a cross. And it was over the star Algol. And it was Satan that had Jesus crucified. So, and as a result, Jesus defeated Satan, the ruler of this world that had a ransom over us through death. Jesus defeated death on the cross through his resurrection. Many Christians mistakenly believe that Jesus' death somehow satisfied the angry wrath of God, but this isn't what the Bible says, and neither is it what the early Christians in the 1st and 2nd centuries believed, the early church fathers and their writings. And Jesus' death was the ransom paid to Satan, the ruler of this world, and because of this and the defeat of death, we are now free to follow Jesus instead of Satan, if we choose to. The paths of these two comets crossed over each other, perpendicular to each other, exactly 1 year apart in 1996 and 1997 on the date April 11th. And they crossed over Algol, the star Algol. And the reason for the two earthquakes that were 8-point magnitude or greater is because this symbolizes Jesus. The numeric value in Greek gematria for the name Jesus in Greek is 888. Greek letters, like Roman letters, are also numbers, and the numeric value of the name Jesus in Greek, which is the language the New Testament was written in, is 888. And it also, the number 8 symbolizes a new beginning, which is Jesus. And so that's why it connects with these two earthquakes, with the birth pains of the new tectonic plate. So this is one way that God has demonstrated through these signs on April 11th that this was in fact the date that Jesus was crucified. Also, just interesting that the Bereshit moonlander crashed on the moon on April 11th, and that was also a second coming sign of Lord Jesus Christ. The moon symbolizes Christ, and that's explained if you'd like to learn about that. The prophetic signs involving the Bereshit moonlander, that's explained in the Bereshit moonlander prophecy video on this channel. Okay, now, as I said, Jesus used the metaphor of birth pains when asked for the signs to look for of his return, and he used this metaphor in context of earthquake signs. And according to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. And so this is why God uses 40 weeks connections frequently. They are extremely prophetic and relevant, especially when they are connecting earthquake signs. And so we have this 40 weeks connection in this trail of signs. It doesn't connect exactly to it, but nonetheless, it's right there with the 9 years before this. An explosion is somewhat of an earthquake. You know, it shakes the ground, if you will. But also, it connects to this, which is also kind of symbolic of an earthquake, which was the biggest volcanic eruption. It was called the once in 1,000 years eruption. And this eruption here, connects with this 40 weeks. So that's confirmation of that, if you will. This eruption, okay, let's get into this. It occurred almost 4 weeks after the eruptions began. In other words, the eruption that occurred on this date that everyone is familiar with, January 15th, 2022, which was, by the way, this is the Pacific Ocean eruption, the new volcano that has risen above the, it was an undersea volcano, and I think it's called Hunga Tonga. And it occurred, the climax of the eruption occurred on this date, which was almost 4 weeks after the eruptions began. This was the same day as the 4 hostages in the synagogue in Texas. This was the day that the terrorist took 4 hostages, and so arguably this 4 weeks is a confirmation of the 4 hostages, but I'll get into more confirmations of this in a minute. This number 4 in the 4 hostages. This was also the day Antichrist symbolism is contained in this date, and this is because the Patriots, the New England Patriots, played the Buffalo Bills. And this was the last playoff game of the Patriots before the end of times tribulation gets going. And the New England Patriots, as explained in other videos, is the most important sports team in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. It symbolizes America, the spiritual founding of America in New England, and on and on. They won the Super Bowl right after 9/11, and on and on. Well, anyway, in this game, they were defeated, which is judgment warning for America. They were defeated by the Bills, and this was the first ever perfect offensive game ever played. Every single play the Bills did was for positive yardage. They didn't lose any yards on any play, and they never didn't convert on a third down except at the very end of the game when they kneeled to end the game, to let the time of the clock run out. And so this was the first ever perfect game, which is quite something. And that is just confirmation of the prophetic significance of this game, which again is judgment warning on America. In this game, the quarterback rushed for 6 times with a total of 66 yards, which gives us 666 symbolism. Making this an Antichrist symbolism sign, it is just amazing. Now, the thing is, this game and this volcanic eruption, the climax of it, occurred exactly 36 weeks before the day that it is predicted that the world's volcanoes will erupt, including Yellowstone. 36 weeks because God uses 36 weeks because the number 36 symbolizes 666, which is stunning confirmation. In other words, the Yellowstone will erupt on September 24th, and this connection wasn't how that date was originally discovered, but it is amazing confirmation because, again, this game contained 666, and it's exactly 36 weeks before the volcano will erupt. Now, the reason for the Bills, and this was learned also before this game, God uses the Buffalo Bills and buffalo signs also. There are other buffalo signs. The Buffalo Bills. Bills, by the way, if you don't know, is the name for a male buffalo. The reason is because God's using buffaloes to point to Yellowstone because of the bison that reside in Yellowstone National Park. That's explained in other videos, but that's the reason for this, and that's why this is stunning confirmation. Now, how does 36 weeks symbolize 666? Well, it is 6 times 6, 36, but also 36 is 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6, and 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, all the way up to 36 equals 666. And the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And so again, 36 weeks exactly from this 666 symbolism game. From the volcano eruption to the volcano eruption, which will really bring in the tribulation end times period. Okay, that'll be explained more in upcoming videos, but I'll just say this. The volcano erupted also at 11:09 p.m., the climax of it, this volcanic eruption, 11:09 p.m., the day before Washington time, on the 14th. Washington, D.C. time. And this is judgment on America. The focus of God's end times signs is America because it's not me that is America-centric. It is God. America is God's Gentile nation. There are only 2 nations that were founded not on language or ethnicity or geography or ideology, but a relationship with God. Israel and America. Anyway, so that's relevant. That's the reason why that's relevant. And from that date, it is 8 months and 11 days to the day that the volcano will erupt, Yellowstone will erupt. And so 8 months and 11 days points to Revelation chapter 8, verse 11, which is the verse in the Bible prophecy talking about the volcano, talking about the asteroids that will hit, which will cause the eruptions of volcanoes around the world, including Yellowstone. Okay? And that's the passage that talks about wormwood, which is talking about the asteroid that will hit Earth. One of the asteroids is described as being a mountain, etc. Okay, so that'll be explained in other videos more adequately. But this was 888 days. Speaking of this 888, two earthquakes that were 8.0 or greater. The day that the Bills lost in the volcano eruption that points to the Yellowstone volcano, well, it was 888 days after the prophetic sign on the date 8/11, August 11th in 2019, in which the prophetic sign was 11,000 birds had mysteriously died in this national wildlife area in southern Montana, just north of the border, just beside Yellowstone National Park, just the border of Wyoming. And that location is situated directly on top of the lava plume of Yellowstone volcano. And the birds died and caused poisoning in the water. And Revelation chapter 8, verse 11 talks about that wormwood poisoning the earth's fresh water. Many of the birds were killed by a freak hailstorm, and then other birds were killed by the poisoned water. But the hailstorm was also symbolism for the asteroids that will hit Earth and cause the wormwood poisoning of water. And it was 11,000, and the number 11 is symbolism from the Bible for the execution of judgment, and this was on the date August 11th. And also in this Revelation chapter 8, hail is mentioned. After the first trumpet was blown, the hail and fire mixed with blood fell on the earth, which is symbolism for the coming death, and the fire from the sky, which would be the asteroids. And arguably, this could be hinting at birds that will be killed in the sky, along with people in planes. We live in an age where many people travel by plane on a daily basis, and so there would be blood in the sky if this were to happen, if there were this shower of asteroids along with these bigger asteroids that are also described in Revelation chapter 8. Also, chapter 8 also does mention a third of the living creatures dying. It talks about living creatures anyway. It's in context of all of this. And I'll just read the part about the poisoned water. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood. And by the way, wormwood means poisoned water. Wormwood is the name of a type of plant which is bitter. Bitter water is what poisoned water was described as. If you had a well and it was bitter, it was poisoned. It was not drinkable. It was toxic, which is why wormwood in this chapter is actually symbolism for poisoned water. And it goes on, a third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. Now, how is a third of the world's water going to become bitter? Due to an asteroid? Well, it's because the asteroid will cause the eruption of Yellowstone, which is why this prophetic sign of this 11,000 birds that died due to poisoned water and hail occurred right on top of the plume of the Yellowstone volcano. The world's volcanoes are going to erupt, spewing ash around the world, which will fall and poison and make the waters bitter. Okay, so that was also a prophetic date. It was the 9th of Av, and that'll be explained more in other videos too. Moving on. Okay, so the number 13 is Antichrist symbolism. From the Bible, it symbolizes the Antichrist. Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the months. And the two antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. 13 days after this was this day here, in which this bridge collapsed, this 50-year-old bridge in Pittsburgh, right beside Squirrel Hill neighborhood. The neighborhood named Squirrel Hill, and this bridge collapsed coincidentally, not coincidentally, it was designed by God, on the day that Joe Biden was in Pittsburgh to talk about and promote his plan for his infrastructure bill. And infrastructure bills are all about repairing bridges. Okay, so that was amazing. Biden actually visited the bridge collapse after it had collapsed in the early morning. It's astounding. Now, there were 4 people that were injured that had to be taken to hospital. And that's confirmation of this 13 days connection to the 4 hostages. But the reason for this is astounding. Okay, so it was 4 injured that went to hospital because of the collapsed bridge next to Squirrel Hill. And this was exactly 170 weeks after the synagogue shooting in Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh, in which 4 police officers were wounded. Absolutely astounding, okay? And so the number 17 is also a number that symbolizes the Antichrist, and it symbolizes the Antichrist that will be vanquished at the return of Lord Jesus Christ at the second coming on the Day of Atonement in 2024. And that it will be in 2024 is confirmed through this prediction. In other words, the reason for God giving me a voice through this prediction is to confirm that the second coming is in 2024. Make no mistake, that is the purpose of this video and this channel. And if it isn't appreciated, you've missed the whole point of this video and this channel. And God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. Because the main conclusions of his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, are inextricably tied to each other. They are, in fact, all one and the same conclusion. Because God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is an interconnected web. One conclusion would not have been possible without the confirmations derived from that conclusion that support the other conclusion. Hopefully I've described that well enough. And so anyway, the reason the day number 17 symbolizes the Day of Atonement is because the Day of Atonement is the 10th day of the 7th month in the Hebrew calendar. Also, in the book of Revelation, the Antichrist is described using a metaphor of a beast which has 7 heads and 10 horns, for which the number 17 also symbolizes. And so this isn't the only connection of 170 weeks exactly, but it's also confirmed with the fact that 170 weeks is exactly also 1,190 days, which hints at 9/11, the biggest judgment warning sign. Okay, a main theme in God's signs, in other words. So, and that is confirmed through that. The relevance of this is confirmed in the other 170 weeks connection, which I explain in the Seinfeld prophecy videos. Okay, so on this same day of the synagogue shooting in Rich Squirrel Hill, in which 4 police officers were wounded, and the media spoke about it and referred to it as the Rich Squirrel Hill neighborhood. Literally, they did that. They always referred to it as the rich, wealthy suburb of Pittsburgh, the Rich Squirrel Hill neighborhood. And this is because on this day, Dodgers pitcher Rich Hill, his name is Rich Hill, on the same day as the Squirrel Hill shooting. And his jersey number is 44, which ties into the 4 police officers. This was the day of the World Series in 2018 when Dodgers manager prematurely pulled the Dodgers pitcher Rich Hill too early from the game, blowing and which ended up blowing the 4-0 lead the Dodgers had. And President Trump, God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his signs, tweeted his disapproval about this. In other words, the tweet was a trumpeting of the confirmation of the prophetic significance of this sign. And so it was and he tweeted in the sign the picture and the 4-0 blown lead. He mentioned the number 4 in his tweet. So it was 4-0 blown lead. And this 4-0 blown lead hints at 40. And this sign occurred exactly 40 weeks after the Humanity Star was launched, which was extreme Antichrist symbolism. It was symbolizing the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem before the birth of the Antichrist. And the Humanity Star was supposed to be in orbit for 9 months, which is a human gestation period. After the 9 months, the Humanity Star was supposed to deorbit and fall back to Earth, which was symbolism for Satan falling like lightning from heaven, as Jesus said. And also Revelation chapter 12 speaks of the dragon being thrown down from heaven by the Archangel Michael to earth. And the dragon symbolizes the Antichrist. And so that's confirmation of that. One of the reasons why I knew of this date ahead of time, in fact, I had made videos predicting that there would be a major sign on this day, and it would involve the number 4. And that was because it was game 4 of the World Series. Yes, player number 44, the story of the game was player number 44 and the 4-0 blown lead, and it was game number 4 on the day of the 4 police officers that were wounded. Well, one of the reasons why I knew of this date ahead of time was not only the 40 weeks connection, but also it was exactly 444 days after the big prophetic Revelation chapter 12 sign, which depicts a birth in the night sky. It's the sign described in Revelation chapter 12, the great sign in heaven. And this prophecy in Revelation chapter 12 describes a birth, which confirms the 40 weeks connection, which again symbolizes a birth, 40 weeks, the average human gestation period, to the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, which is of course birth symbolism because it's symbolizing it's the Antichrist, it's the anti-Star of Bethlehem, it's the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, the Humanity Star. And the ideology of this thing was supposed to be just a promotion for the company, but it was supposed to be this symbolic thing. It was supposed to glitter in the night sky and be this thing that would bring humanity together. If you read the description of it from the company Rocket Lab, it was very Antichrist. Okay. The philosophy behind it was secular humanism, etc. Again, we have the 4 police officers wounded in the Jewish synagogue, and this was the day of Game 4 of the World Series, in which the story was about player number 44 and how the 4-0 lead was blown, which hinted at 40, and it was 40 weeks after the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem, the Humanity Star, and 40 weeks is the average human gestation period. And this game 4 and player number 44 and the 4 police officers wounded was 444 days after the Revelation 12 sign was fulfilled in the night sky, which depicted a birth. And all of this, player number 44 and the 4 police officers wounded on the day of game 4, is exactly 44 months before June 27th, 2022. The date is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran. And this event, Israel bombing Iran, will ultimately lead to the rise of the Antichrist, the 44th president. So moving on, exactly 6 months after this synagogue shooting that injured 4 police officers was the day of this synagogue shooting in Poway, California, in which 4 people were shot. It's amazing, all right? Now, the reason for 6 months is because of this. This shooting here was exactly 36 months, and I just finished explaining how the number 36 is symbolism for 666, which is Antichrist symbolism, which makes this relevant. This shooting was exactly 36 months, and by the way, this is Jews, right? It's the synagogue shooting, to the day that Israel, a nation of Jews, will nuke Iran, all right? Obviously, a shooting is extreme violence in a shooting in a synagogue, and so is a nuking Iran. Okay, the reason why this is also relevant this 6 months is because 36 is so. Moving on, exactly 6 months after this synagogue shooting that injured 4 police officers was the day of this synagogue shooting in Poway, California, in which 4 people were shot. It's amazing. All right. Now, the reason for 6 months is because of this. This shooting here was exactly 36 months, and I just finished explaining how the number 36 is symbolism for 666, which is Antichrist symbolism, which makes this relevant. This shooting was exactly 36 months. And by the way, this is Jews, right? It's the synagogue shooting to the day that Israel, a nation of Jews, will nuke Iran. All right? Obviously, a shooting is extreme violence in a shooting in a synagogue, and so is a nuking Iran. Okay, the reason why this is also relevant this 6 months is because 36 is 6 times 6, which confirms the 6 months, but also this shooting was 42 months. In other words, there's a 6 months difference between 42 months and 36 months. And 42 months is mentioned, a period of 42 months is mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy, which is referring to the symbolic period of the Antichrist's rule. And it is only symbolic. Prophecy students most of them will be surprised and shocked even to hear that said, because they believe that they will know when the 36 or the 42 months will begin, and it'll all be official, and we're not inside the 42 months, let alone the 7 years they're thinking about too. But the thing is that the truth is that the 3.5 years, which is 42 months, is symbolic of the time times and a half time. Most people think that the time times and a half time is some sort of riddle or puzzle that reveals 3.5 years, but it's the other way around. The 3.5 years is symbolism for the time times and a half time, which is symbolism for tribulation. Even an individual will go through a period of tribulation, followed by a period of doubling or an increased period of that tribulation, the testing of faith, followed by an easing of that tribulation period. And one thing that confirms this is that in Daniel chapter 12, we have the 1260 days, which is the 42 months. And then we also have 1290 days and 1335 days. Well, 1290 days is 30 days more than 1260 days. And 1335 days is 45 days more than the 1290 days. 30 days and 45 days is 3.5 months, which is more 3.5 symbolism. Another thing that confirms this is the extremely amazing and prophetic sign, which is the discovery of the endurance ship, the Shackleton expedition to Antarctica, the discovery of it this year in March of 2022. But anyway, this experience of the men on this ship is complete confirmation of this. So once they disembarked the ship, they experienced their tribulation experiences, endeavors on the ice floe. They also set up, for example, Camp Patience, endurance, tribulation, the patient endurance of the saints during the tribulation period, for example. Okay, so that their experience on the ice floe, which I forget how long that lasted, but it lasted quite a number of days. They had to patiently wait for the ice to break up. And that was followed by their epic sea journey on the dangerous South Atlantic Antarctica Ocean to Elephant Island. Upon reaching Elephant Island, half of the crew were left behind, and 6 men continued on to South Georgia Island. Okay, now which was an even more arduous journey and extreme story of survival. And by the way, this whole endurance, Shackleton story is arguably the most extreme story of human endurance and survival of all time. Anyway, there was 2 legs of the sea journey, which hints at the times. So the ice flow time, sea journeys, 2 of them, times. And then once they reached South Georgia Island, they reached the south side. They had to cross over the island to the other side of the island where the whaling station was. South Georgia was an uncharted island, and they had to cross a mountain range. And so 3 people were left on the shore of South Georgia, and only 3 continued on. And the journey across the island was 3.5 days. And that symbolized the easing of the journey. But that was an extremely arduous journey as well. But that was arguably, the easing, symbolizing the easing of the tribulation. So we have the times and a half time. The ice flow, the 2 sea journeys, and then the crossing of the island. All right, I love to go into that. I don't know if I'll go into that every single video when I'm talking about 42 months, but it's just a recent sign that I've recently discovered. So I've explained it now twice in the 2 recent videos. I'll probably explain it a couple more times, but not every time I go into explaining how we are already inside the last 1,260 days, which began on May 2nd, 2021, and the extremely prophetic sign that occurred on that date confirms it, which is explained in other videos, but it was the splashdown of the SpaceX Dragon capsule, pointing to Revelation chapter 12 with the dragon and his minions being thrown down, the Dragon capsule and the Dragon crew of SpaceX. It is said in Revelation chapter 12 that the dragon and his angels were thrown down from heaven to earth at the beginning of the 1,260 days, the final 42 months. All right, now, coming back to this Poway, California shooting, the media stories talked about how it was a population of 50,000, this town in California. It's very similar to how the media kept talking about how it was rich Squirrel Hill. For whatever reason, the media had to, preface the talk of these towns with the adjective rich, and also had to continually talk about the size of the town. Well, the reason why they continued to talk about the size of the town is because it's pointing to the Chernobyl disaster. Okay. The Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine forced the evacuation of the town Pripyat, Ukraine, which had a population of 50,000. And it was exactly 33 years before this synagogue shooting in the town of 50,000, in which 4 people were shot. And the Chernobyl disaster was the explosion of reactor number 4. Absolutely stunning. This is also Antichrist symbolism, by the way, because this town Pripyat was built for the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And it was designed by the communist socialists with this, they had this ideal city in mind. It was supposed to be this ideal utopia, community city, right? That was the design of it. Which is Antichrist symbolism. The Antichrist will fool the majority of people on earth and his plan for utopia to solve the world's problems with the extreme crisis that comes. All right, so that's what Pripyat symbolizes. Today, this town Pripyat is a tourist destination because it is this ghost town that has been overgrown with forest. Wildlife meanders through the former streets of the town, and it's quite interesting because of this. But it is also symbolism of, in a way, Armageddon, or the apocalypse or end times, this future utopia gone bad. Now, 33 years is prophetic, arguably, but it's confirmed because it symbolizes the Trinity in Christ. But it's confirmed by this here, which is this 36 months connection, as I was explaining already. Now, that is a second witness to this. 36 years connection. And that's, by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter. And that's what makes this true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique from everything else on the internet. And so, again, as I explained, 36 is symbolism for 666 and Antichrist symbolism, which is why it connects with the Pripyat. And it's reactor number 4 because the Antichrist is the 44th president. And that's why it's reactor 4 connecting with the 4 shot in the synagogue. It's because the Antichrist is the 44th president. And so 36 years after the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster, and by the way, it's in Ukraine, which is the country made up of 44 million people. Prior to the Russia invasion, it was 44 million people, and it's being led by a leader that is 44 years old, who is Antichrist symbolism. Zelensky, which is why he spoke at the UN Security Council, for example, on the same day that the 44th president returned for the first time to the White House on April 5th. But that's another story. But Israel will use nuclear bombs to bomb and destroy Iran's nuclear weapons program exactly 36 years after the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster. That's absolutely stunning. This is, of course, how I first started looking at April 26th. And then all of the other pieces started fitting, which is explained in this video and the other videos. If you happen to notice that this date for this shooting was on the 27th, and technically not an exact 33 years and 36 months to these dates, which are on the 26th, the reason why this was done, it still is relevant because this 26th would be the end of 36 months. But the reason why God needed to do this, one reason, is because this day here was the Feast of First Fruits, and that begins the 50-day count to Pentecost. And so that's why, for example, the town was 50,000. And this is relevant because this also occurred in conjunction with these other signs that were also the signs relevant to the Feast of First Fruits and the beginning of this Omer count of 49 and 50 days to Pentecost, which is described in the Bible. And for example, there was the 49ers, San Francisco 49ers Trump sign, which I won't explain right now. And also the lunar module left over from the Apollo program that was discovered orbiting around the moon, 50,000 feet above the moon. It was announced, the story came out on this day as well. And it was the 50th anniversary. 2019 was the 50th anniversary of the landing on the moon. But the point is that this had to occur on this date. Also, the signs on October 27th in Game 4, including the 4 police officers wounded in Rich Squirrel Hill in that synagogue shooting, was also the 27th. And that's another reason why this needed to occur on the 27th and not the 26th in this case. And so because of all of these other confirmations, it's appreciated that this is exactly what's going on here, is that it is what God needed to do in order to develop his signs and connections here in this case. All right, now returning back to this, 144 is 12 times 12, and 144 is a very prominent and prophetic number in the book of Revelation, and it is used in context of the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 12 tribes, the 12,000 in each tribe. And we're talking about the synagogue shooting, and it connects exactly with 144 weeks, which, by the way, is Jews, and we're talking about Israel here in this video and diagram and trail of signs. And so it connects with 144 weeks exactly to the Squirrel Hill shooting, which is amazing. Okay, so these two synagogue shootings connect, sorry, this isn't a shooting, but they connect with the Squirrel Hill bridge collapse. Again, the bridge collapsed right next to Squirrel Hill. And 4 people had to be rushed to hospital, which is confirmation of all of this. 4 people shot, 4 police officers wounded. In other words, this bridge collapse connects extremely profoundly with its 4 injured that went to hospital, with the 4 shot and the 4 police officers wounded. Okay. Now, this needs to be confirmed with a second witness, this 13 days. It is Antichrist symbolism, and it does fit because of this, Antichrist symbolism in these signs here and here. But there's another confirmation, which involves a number, which is that this sign here, this date, which, by the way, was January 28th, 2022, the bridge collapse and Biden's visit was 130 days to the day that Kamala Harris will crash. So the bridge collapsed and caused the crash of the bus. What's another thing? The bridge collapsed, it just happened to collapse when the big, long city bus was on it. And anyway, so it was a crash. It was a crash from a height above ground to the ground, just like how Kamala Harris will crash from a height in her plane to the ground. And this is connecting to the crash of Kamala Harris in her airplane on June 7th, 2022. And her death will lead the way to the Antichrist becoming president again. Michelle Obama will replace Kamala Harris, and then later Barack Obama will replace Michelle Obama. Okay? And so obviously the number 130 is symbolism for the number 13, which, as I explained, is symbolism for the Antichrist. And what else also confirming this is that 130 days after the day that Kamala Harris will die will be the day that Barack Obama will become the 47th president. He will either be sworn in on this day or possibly the Supreme Court will rule on the 22nd Amendment, which will allow him to become president again. The 22nd Amendment restricts someone from being elected to the office more than twice. Barack Obama will be appointed instead, thus overcoming the election part of the 22nd Amendment. All right. Now, God pairs numbers together, and if you think about it, that's how he would develop and confirm his big picture of signs, as they are second witnesses when they are paired together. And he pairs these particular numbers together frequently to confirm the signs and connections, including pairing 23 and 44 to point to the 44th president, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. And actually, coincidentally, I just mentioned that date when Zelensky was at the UN and Barack Obama was visiting the White House again for the first time, supposedly for celebrating his passage of Obamacare, which is Antichrist symbolism in itself. Nationalized health care will be how the Antichrist will persecute God's people through the mark of the Antichrist, which is the VACCINE and is not a supposed precursor to the mark of the Antichrist. And I explain more about that in other videos. And so that's why the 44th president also is a pairing of 23 and 44. Also, Zelensky is 44 years old. He represents the nation of 44 million people. And he spoke at the UN on this day. And that's because collective security and NATO is Antichrist and is a major sin. When we read the Bible, we see that Israel, when it developed these collective security agreements and partnerships with other kings, they suffered and were defeated. And so it's clear in the Bible. The reason is because, and if we read about it too in 2 Chronicles, when these kings of Judah did this, they emptied the temple, the temple, the house of God, of its silver and gold to bribe these other kings to come to their help, which was also symbolic because the reason is that relying on collective security agreements with other nations is tantamount to not trusting in God and rebellion against God. There is also the warnings in the book of Jeremiah to not go down to Egypt and make alliances, military alliances with Egypt. But the Jews didn't heed Jeremiah's warning, and they did so anyway, and then they suffered ruination. Isaiah chapter 31, for example, woe to those who go down to Egypt and rely on horses. This chapter finishes with the Antichrist being defeated by the Messiah at the second coming. So NATO is Antichrist, and so is collective security. And I'll say this, not only is this leading to the Antichrist, who will promise peace and security, as Paul prophesied in his writings. And that's why Zelensky's speaking at the UN calling for collective security. He is symbolizing the Antichrist. That's why he's 44 years old and represents the nation of 44 million people. And that's why he spoke at the UN on the day that the 44th president made his big triumphant return to the White House. We are getting ourselves into trouble, America that is. And again, America is God's Gentile nation. And so this is why America was blessed with its geography in between two expansive oceans. We don't need these security agreements. And for the first couple of hundred years, the founders also had a foreign policy of non-interventionism. That changed, unfortunately, at the end of the 19th century. But for the first 100 years after the founders, that was the foreign policy of America. And it's the policy that it should be. Because, again, as I'm saying, it's sin to be getting involved in these permanent security arrangements with other nations. Because it's tantamount to not trusting in God. It's a form of rebellion against God. And America will be judged for it. And actually, the Antichrist is going to emerge as a result of this conflict in Ukraine. That's where this is all going. It's headed to a new world order of collective security in which NATO, for example, or a NATO-like organization is extended to the entire world. That's why the mass formation, the collective mass psychosis, totalitarianism that's extended beyond COVID and the VACCINE into the Ukraine conflict. You cannot say anything critical. It's if you do of Ukraine or the president or anything contrary to the narrative. If you do, it's disinformation. It needs to be censored, and you are dangerous. You are a traitor as well. You are also immoral. Okay. That's the reason for that is because it's all leading to the Antichrist, okay? And just like Zelensky, how he banned 11 political parties and shut down media and condensed it into one media outlet, that will happen in the name of peace and security and war, because the goal here for Satan and the powers of the darkness is to escalate this war and bring America into the war in order to be able to persecute conservatives and Christians and any opposition to the war effort, okay? And the plan for collective security and the new world order. In fact, if we use Israel as a template, it is clear from the Bible that standing armies for a nation are wrong and evil. This will be a shock for many people, but America should not have a standing army, nor should any country have a standing army. The defense of a nation lies in the hands of its citizens. Every male of age needs to be equipped and trained with military-grade weapons. And this is the only way to preserve freedom and liberty and defend a nation from a foreign enemy and a tyrannical leader that will turn on its citizens, which will happen eventually with a standing army, and is about to happen within the next few months in America. Furthermore, the tyranny that has occurred since 2020 would not have occurred had the citizens had the power that they should have. Now, I'm just going to play a short clip of someone else explaining this much better and the history involved with this going back 800 years. It's very interesting, which is why I'm playing this clip in the middle of this video. And it is necessary to know this information.
And this is where you American gun owners are in real trouble, and where your nation is in trouble. Your amendment is going down in flames because of the way it's being redefined. And so are all the other 9 major amendments of the Bill of Rights, including the 10th Amendment, including the First Amendment. Okay, when your free speech and my free speech is certainly being stolen away from us. Your guns will have no future protection once public opinion and the opinion of judges is on the side of the Biden definition of the Constitution. Cowardly legislatures, like we saw in the year 2020, will go along with this, just as they tolerated unlawful balloting practices and arbitrary medical regulations. You saw that. I saw that. They didn't have backbone because the average legislature does not know history or the text of the Constitution. Now, here's how you can change that. You need to refute the Biden machine with historical fact. And let me give you 14 facts just to get you in the fight. And you need to roll these out. You need to be talking about these. If you're serious about the Second Amendment, you need to start getting these into the minds of people and replacing what they have been told in public schools and in their universities and by the Biden machine over the last 40 years, starting with the year 1792. Okay, and we're going to work our way backwards because I want you to see where there's a connection between the Second Amendment as it was written and really 800 years of history and why it's so wrong for anyone to come along and say, well, it's obsolete now because we don't have muskets anymore. No, there's our principles behind it that make it absolutely required that we hang on to it, protect it, and preserve it. So only a year after, look at this year now, only a year after the ratification of the Constitution and the Second Amendment, Congress passed legislation which strengthened, it even went beyond the Second Amendment. It strengthened the Second Amendment principles. The laws upheld that were passed then, 1792, upheld the tradition that civilian citizens must arm themselves with military weapons of war. These were the Militia Acts of 1792. And it said citizens are required by law to equip themselves with their own musket, their bayonet war belt, 2 spare flints, a box able to contain not less than 24 suitable cartridges, and a knapsack. I mean, this was the weaponry of the Minuteman. It was also the weaponry of the Redcoat, the infantrymen who invaded our country. I mean, we were using military weaponry to preserve our freedom. And in times of peace, citizens need this just in case a tyrannical ruler decides to steal freedom away also. This is military weaponry of destruction. And going back even before the Second Amendment, the American colonists spoke this language. They spoke this centuries-old language because it was a deep-running foundation of English common law. Look at the Virginia Colony Declaration of Rights. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, trained to arms, is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. Now look at this one, Pennsylvania, that colony's declaration of 1776. The people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. The North Carolina Colony Declaration. The people have a right to bear arms for the defense of the state. And so when a time comes to write the Second Amendment for the new American Constitution, they are used to these ideas in this language because they are rooted in reality and in history. The Massachusetts Colony Declaration of Rights in 1780. The people have a right to keep and bear arms for the common defense. Now look at this quote by a cavalry officer who fought with Washington, Henry Lee, who understood this and tried to summarize it in one little sentence. And this captures that very, very well. Every man capable of bearing arms. And back then, as we will see as we go back in history, they believed that every man roughly aged 15 to 60 should be capable of training themselves in arms and bearing arms for the defense of their nation against intruders or against their own governments. So Henry Lee says this, every man capable of bearing arms must use them in aid or in opposition to the country of his birth. Okay, now how does that work? Well, if you have an invading army coming after you, all of your people are well trained in arms and they own all their own weaponry. They can gather together and they can repel the enemy. Or if a tyrant wants to seize control of all the people and all their goods and turn them back into slaves, then they have the ability then to rise up against him and depose him or replace him. Now, going back in history, 1644, Massachusetts colony law, as far back as that, every citizen is to provide for himself and each under him able to bear arms, a sufficient musket and other serviceable piece, as well as 2 pounds of powder and 10 pounds of bullets. Do you see how specific these things get? Yes, this is weaponry of war. These are weapons of mass destruction. When you get 1,000 men out there from your community who've trained together, and each of whom have all these things, they don't need to wait to be provided them by the government. They're ready to throw these over their shoulders and go out and face an enemy and defeat him. 1631 is a common law of the time. All men that are fitting are to bear arms and to bring their pieces to the church upon pain of every offense. And across the colonies, north to south, there were laws like these saying, you need to bring these to church on pain of every offense. There would be some sort of a punishment, usually a fine of tobacco or something. And what they would do in the afternoons after church was to drill, to practice, to get together and practice loading. I mean, you know, you could get to the point where you could stuff gunpowder into a musket 3 times every minute and a musket ball and fire accurately 3 times every minute. Look at the year 1541. And this is a law going back across the Atlantic into England. All inhabitants of cities and towns may have and keep in every one of their houses handguns, hagbutts, and demi-hakes. Okay, these are all weapons of mass destruction. These are all weapons of warfare, and they're to be in the hands of the citizens and in every home. They're military weapons of war. 1511, the weapons of war archery laws, and these changed quite a bit, but they were all consistent with the very same principle. All fathers were to provide their sons with appropriate bows and arrows and to teach them how to shoot the bows starting at age 7 and have these weapons in their home, right? 1363, the archery laws required practice of archery on Sundays and holy days and forbade on pain of death all sport that took up time better spent on war training, especially archery practice. So in some places of England, it was, people were tempted to replace the serious things of responsible living and responsible preparation against potential enemies. And England had a lot of potential enemies because they were such a rich nation. And there were invaders all the time. And they knew that they should stay prepared and stay armed and be trained in arms. Just owning arms in your home is not enough. You need to continue to be training. The year 1285, the Statute of Winchester, a really important one. It's a rather long statute. It ordered men in every village, aged 15 to 60, to be armed for defense and keeping of the peace with military weapons of war. The year 1181, and I won't go back further than this, but you get the picture, don't you? The assize of arms of Henry II. All classes of men were to arm themselves with military weaponry. And it was specific again, a shirt of mail, a helmet, a shield, and a lance. And these two could be, the lance could be a weapon of mass destruction in the right hands of someone who's trained with all of his neighbors to go out to war together. Now, when any politician says that military weapons of war have no place in civilian hands, you have to be able to refute that and say why it's not true. Private military-grade weapons are the protectors of liberty and have been since the days of King Alfred and King Canute and King Henry and other good rulers who wanted liberty for their people. Now, the tyrants who wanted something else, who wanted to take liberty away, they always had to first get the weapons out of the hands of the citizenry. And then they had to create permanent government armies. And so the American founders knew this history, that these were the 2 pillars of liberty. The citizen all must be armed. Okay, do you understand that? No government can build up for itself a standing army and keep a standing army of soldiers who can be turned against the citizens. And so our founders were determined to preserve these lessons, learn from history, learn the hard way, learn the bloody way. Because freedom does rest on the realities of this armed citizenry and the absence of standing armies. Daniel Webster put it this way in the year of the Constitution in 1787. He said this: before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom of Europe. And that's true. That was even true at that time. It's become even worse now, even in your day. The supreme power in America, meaning the new government that's being formed by this new Constitution, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, the supreme power there cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, meaning by weaponry, because the whole body of the people are armed. And that's how it was then, and that's how it was meant to be. And so disarmament cannot happen. We can't change history, the truths of history. We can't change the meaning and the intent of the framers of the Constitution just because certain tyrannical people want to disarm the people so that they can exert more power over them. So learn your history. Teach it to everyone in your state. And do not let the Bill of Rights be redefined out of existence.
Well, anyway, that's why this was 23 days. Because, again, the Antichrist wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school, the basketball president. That's why it's 23 days after this day here. Now, okay, this is a really big day. This was a day that was predicted ahead of time. I predicted that there would be explosions involving the U.S. on this day. And it ended up being... I predicted that the dirty bomb would be detonated in Manhattan on this day, but it ended up being another step along the way to that day, and I will explain that. But this was the day that the GOAT of football, the greatest of all time, Tom Brady, announced in a tweet that he was going to return for a 23rd season. He mentioned 23rd in his tweet, and this return of the GOAT of football coincided with the announcement in a tweet of the 44th president that he had COVID and told everyone that they should get the vaccine, which is, of course, again, the mark of the Antichrist, and it connects with 23 days to his return to the White House. Okay, and he will return as president this autumn, which is why the GOAT, which is Antichrist symbolism, GOAT of football, mentioned his return in the autumn for another season, football season. Also, the news stories regarding the Brady's announcement to return and play another year also mentioned his age, which is 44 years old. And so the 23 days is paired with the 44 here, the 44 years old and the 44th president. And for that matter, these two, as I will explain, 44 days and 44 days, are also confirmed with the 44 years and the 44th president. Okay. Now, on this day were the 12 rockets that were fired from Iran, which exploded right near the U.S. consulate in northern Iraq. These were explosions involving the U.S., which was amazing because I had predicted that ahead of time. Also, this was the day that rockets fired by Russia exploded right next to the border of Poland, which was the location of the base, the military base or place where U.S. operatives train Ukrainians and their soldiers and bring in and supply them with weapons. Just hours before this, Russia had warned the U.S. that this sort of thing was a legitimate target. And this is as close as Russia gets to bombing America without actually bombing America. Because Poland is part of NATO, which, if we're honest, is essentially a U.S. organization. And so that's why it was right on the border of NATO and America, therefore. Okay. And so it was 12 rockets, and the GOAT wears jersey number 12, Tom Brady. That hinted at 12 times 12, 144, and 144 days after this will be the day of I believe, the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on the birthday of the 44th president, August 4th. Anyway, this in turn connects with 44 days, and again is confirmed with the 23rd season, and also this 23 days connection here. It's 44 days to the day that Israel will nuke Iran, okay? So from the day that Israel will nuke Iran, it is 44 days back to this sign, which includes explosions in the Middle East, for that matter, too, by the way. And this in turn is another 44 days to this day here, which is extremely prophetic, when the 4 people injured that went to hospital, a confirmation of the 44, because it connects with the 4 police officers and the 4 people shot in these 2 synagogue shootings, as I just explained. So there you have it, my friends. I believe I've explained everything in this video now. It is just amazing. All right, there's one more thing here, and that is that back from the day that Israel will nuclear bomb Iran, it is exactly 23 weeks, which is a number of weeks that God uses frequently in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. For one thing, it is symbolism for the Antichrist, the president that played basketball and wore jersey number 23. But also 23 weeks is also coincidentally almost exactly 44% of a year. And God pairs 23 and 44 all of the time in order to confirm the signs and connections. Anyway, exactly 23 years back is the day of this IAEA report, which is the international organization that monitors nuclear weapons programs or nuclear technology around the world. And so this date, by the way, too, was November 17th, which is confirmation of the 23 weeks, because this date here is also Barack Obama's symbolism, because Barack Obama's name in Hebrew means lightning from heaven, which is what Jesus said when he said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. Barak is the word for lightning in Hebrew, and Bama is the word for high place, which is a metaphor used for heaven, for example, in the Bible, for example, in Isaiah chapter 14, when it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place. But also the ancient Jews would conduct their false religious idolatrous worship on the tops of mountains, and the metaphor used for that was the high places. And so, in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, is the word for from. So Barack Obama, lightning from heaven. Well, anyway, the word Bama is the 1,117th word in Strong's Hebrew concordance. And so that's why God uses the date, for example, here in 2021 and also in 2020, for example, to symbolize this. In 2020, that was the day that Barack Obama released his extremely prophetic autobiography, A Promised Land, on November 17th. And so anyway, yeah, that confirms the 23 weeks connection. Well, on this day was the day that the IAEA released its report regarding the Natanz. And it was the report coming after the Natanz explosion and blackout, which was mentioned at the beginning of this video on April 11th. On November 17th, I'm just reading from Wikipedia, 2021, the IAEA released their quarterly safeguards report regarding verification and monitoring in the Islamic Republic of Iran in light of United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231. The report concludes that the number of enriching IR-1 cascades and IR-2M cascades at the Natanz fuel enrichment plant appear to have almost fully recovered from a sabotage incident in April. Iran installed 31 cascades of IR-1 centrifuges, 6 cascades, and on, etc. So that's really relevant here because, in other words, what this IAEA report is stating is that they had fully recovered from the sabotage that Israel did in April. And this is very important in this trail of signs, as we can see. In fact, this video could theoretically be titled this, although I won't do that because no one will recognize really what I'm talking about. But this is arguably one of the main things about this entire video, because of it being pointing to this date here, when Israel will bomb Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. And so anyway, that's why this is relevant. The IAEA report confirming that they have recovered, which is why Israel will now need to nuclear bomb these facilities and destroy them once and for all. And that's why it's an extremely prophetic 23 weeks connection after this IAEA report. In terms of God's prophetic signs and knowing what God is doing, after having watched this video, you are now one of the most informed people on the planet. The question is, what will you now do with this information? And how many people will you help get this video to? Keep on posting the link to this video everywhere in social media. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. Jesus died for you. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. The purpose of the predictions in this video, the reason for God giving me a voice through these predictions in this video that will come to pass, is to prove the following things. The God of the Bible and Israel is the true God. God has a son, and he died for everyone. Everyone can be saved if they repent of sin and put their trust in him. And if you haven't done this already, there is no time like the present. You can begin this honest and sincere relationship with God through a humble prayer, asking for forgiveness for your sins, and thanking him for sending his Son, Lord Jesus Christ, to pay the ransom so that you can be with him forever. Obviously, when these predictions come to pass, you will know that you should watch all of the videos on this channel. Hopefully you at least found this introduction video to be interesting, and if so, please leave a like and upvote the video, and please consider sharing the video. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com, or PredictionsProveIt.com. And also check out the other information that I have linked to on the website. You should also pause this video right now and make a note of my other social media outlets. You never know when you will need them, and you might not be able to find them later. Also, if you want to download these videos as podcasts, I now have a podcast channel at Podbean, which is named Predictions Prove It.